For most of human history, cities were not built on fields of grain. They were built on forests. Long before grocery stores, supply chains, and annual harvest schedules, people organized their lives around perennial abundance. Oaks and chestnuts shaped where settlements emerged, how large populations could grow, and how long communities could endure. These trees were not decorative elements of the landscape. They were infrastructure, living food systems that renewed themselves year after year without plows, without fertilizers, without constant human intervention. Acorns and chestnuts were not emergency foods. They were staples, reliable, calorie-dense, and predictable in a way annual crops rarely were. A single mast year could feed a village through winter. Several good years could sustain generations. Where these trees thrived, humans stayed, not because the land was easy to farm, but because the forest could be trusted. This is why early settlements clustered near woodland rather than open plains. A forest was a living storehouse. It asked for patience, not control. Across Europe, Asia, and the Mediterranean, acorns and chestnuts formed the backbone of daily diets. In ancient Greece, oak groves were considered sacred, not only spiritually, but practically. Acorns fed people and livestock alike. In Rome, chestnut forests were known as arboreal granaries. In medieval Italy, France, and the Balkans, chestnuts were so central that entire regions survived winter almost exclusively on chestnut flour. They were dried, ground, boiled, roasted, fermented, baked. In Japan, Korea, and parts of China, acorns were processed into flour and jelly, providing stable calories through cold seasons. In Iberia and North Africa, oak mast supported integrated systems, where humans, animals, and forests fed one another. These cultures did not see forests as wilderness. They saw them as cultivated abundance. Knowledge was essential. Acorns, bitter in their raw state, were leached slowly in water to remove tannins. What remained was a mild, nourishing flour, rich in carbohydrates, fats, and minerals. Chestnuts, naturally sweet and low in fat, required even less processing. They stored well, they traveled well, they sustained long labor. The forest did the work. No tilling, no irrigation, no fertilizer, just time. This is why famine records across history often describe grain failure, but rarely forest collapse. Annual crops depend on a single season. Trees do not. Their roots reach deep, their yields fluctuate, but their presence endures. And yet today, acorns are treated as debris. Chestnuts are seasonal novelty, sold briefly, disconnected from survival, something nostalgic, something ornamental. Not food. Certainly not the foundation of cities. What changed was not nutrition, it was power. As centralized states formed, food became a tool of governance. Annual crops could be measured, taxed, stored, seized. Fields could be owned, bordered, controlled. Forests resisted this logic. They were communal by nature, long-term by design, difficult to enclose. Trees feed anyone who waits. That made them inconvenient. Across Europe, forest laws slowly restricted access. Acorn gathering was criminalized in many regions. Common lands were enclosed. Chestnut groves were privatized, cut, or converted. People who once fed themselves were pushed toward dependence on grain markets and wages. This shift was framed as progress, but it was really a transfer of power. Then came industrialization, and with it, a new definition of efficiency. Machines favored uniformity. Monocrops fit factories. Trees did not. A wheat field could be harvested in hours. A chestnut forest required decades of care. Acorns demanded knowledge passed between generations. None of this fit an economy obsessed with speed, scale, and standardization. So forests were cleared, sometimes violently, sometimes bureaucratically, often described as development. They were replaced by pasture, then by grain, then by roads, housing, and cities disconnected from the ecosystems that once fed them. By the 20th century, the rupture was nearly complete. Urban populations no longer knew how to process acorns. Chestnut flour disappeared from daily diets. Knowledge survived only in isolated mountain villages, wartime improvisation, and fading memory. Then came catastrophe. In the early 1900s, the American chestnut, once one of the most important food trees on Earth, was annihilated by blight. Nearly 4 billion trees died in a few decades. Entire ecosystems collapsed. A food system that had sustained people for centuries vanished almost overnight. The response revealed everything. Instead of restoring chestnut forests, societies doubled down on annual crops. Supermarkets expanded. Processed foods replaced seasonal ones. The idea that cities could be fed by forests faded from imagination, not because it was impossible, but because it no longer fit the system. Grocery stores promised abundance without participation. Food became something you purchased, not something you tended. Knowledge became unnecessary until something broke. Acorns and chestnuts never stopped being nutritious. Chestnuts are rich in complex carbohydrates, fiber, vitamin C, potassium, and antioxidants. Unlike most nuts, they are low in fat and highly digestible. Acorns contain healthy fats, magnesium, calcium, and slow-burning energy. They support endurance and stable blood sugar. Modern analysis confirms what ancient diets already knew, but these foods demand engagement. You cannot outsource a forest. Grocery systems thrive on dependency. You no longer gather, process, or store. You rely on uninterrupted supply chains, cheap energy, and distant production. The cost is invisible until disruption arrives. Forests represent the opposite logic. They are decentralized, slow, resilient. They feed locally. They reward knowledge rather than money. They distribute power rather than concentrate it. That is why they were sidelined. But the conditions that once made forests seem obsolete are returning in reverse. Climate instability now stresses grain belts. Soil degradation reduces yields. Water scarcity intensifies. Energy-intensive agriculture grows fragile. Supply chains fracture under pressure. And suddenly, perennial food systems no longer look backward. They look prepared. Acorns and chestnuts require no irrigation once established. They stabilize soil. They prevent erosion. They sequester carbon. They support biodiversity. A single mature oak can produce hundreds of pounds of food in a good year. A chestnut grove can feed communities without machines. Cities once understood this. The hills around Rome were chestnut-fed. Japanese mountain towns relied on acorn processing through winter. Mediterranean societies blended grain and tree foods to buffer risk. We built cities on this food, not out of romance, but necessity. Grocery stores did not replace forests because they fed people better. They replaced them because they centralized speed, profit, and control. But speed has consequences. As modern diets struggle with metabolic disease, nutrient depletion, and ecological collapse, the old systems are no longer theoretical. They are being quietly reconsidered. Researchers now study acorn flour as a gluten-free staple with low glycemic impact. Chestnut flour returns in artisanal baking and food security planning. Reforestation projects increasingly include food trees, not for nostalgia, but resilience. Still, the cultural gap remains vast. Most people no longer recognize food unless it comes packaged. We forgot that nourishment can fall from trees. We forgot that cities once depended on forests the way they now depend on logistics, and that forgetting was not accidental. It was the cost of trading resilience for convenience. Acorns and chestnuts were never erased because they failed. They were erased because they could not be easily owned, annually taxed, or mechanized. They belong to time, not quarterly returns. But forests are patient. The knowledge is dormant, not dead. Stored in old texts, rural memory, and the biology of trees still standing in parks, hillsides, and forgotten land. When systems fracture, forests respond. When monocrops fail, trees endure. We did not stop eating acorn and chestnuts because they were inferior. We stopped because we stopped living in ways that could accommodate them. But as cities face new limits, soil, climate, energy, the old question returns quietly. What feeds people when systems break? History already answered. We built cities on this food, and sooner than we expect, we may need to remember how again.